Okay, so today we just want to go over like what it takes to get a home sold, what it takes to get your home sold for top dollar, and kind of what you as the homeowner need to do versus what your agent does. So basically, the first step to getting your home sold is reaching out to an agent. Once you've reached out to an agent or a couple of them, you talk to them on the phone, and then you schedule a time, to meet in person, so that they can see the house, make any recommendations in order to get the home sold for top dollar. So, I mean, step one, I guess, is when we meet with you, we go over the listing packet. We tell you everything we're going to do, but then once we're hired, essentially, it's basically going over a list of things that need to be done on the house or that should or could be done, right? To prepare it ultimately for that content day. So I'm thinking like, I'm trying to think of little things, but something that comes up all the time here is moss on a roof, right? It's very visible from photos. It's visible in person, and it's something that everybody understands like costs a lot of money from the buyer's perspective. Potentially, it just shows kind of deferred maintenance, but it's not expensive to handle. So
Yeah.
little
Well,
things
some
like
people
that.
just think it's a bad roof. Sometimes it's not. It's like, yeah, you just got to clean the moss off.
Exactly.
And it's got a lot of time
Yep.
left on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So any little items like that are kind of a no brainer, right? Anything that's just not going to be expensive. It's not that difficult, to hire out, things like that. But that's kind of what you as a homeowner. It's another thing like during the inspection period, a bunch of stuff comes up that the sellers maybe are unaware of or don't think are a big deal. But it's like that same seller when they're going to go buy a house, they're going to bring up the same things. It's just they've lived there and it's never caused them a problem per se,
Mhm.
but like it could. So it's kind of just being ahead of any issues that are going to come up. And then so I guess step two is deciding how we want to stage it. How we want to stage it for photos. So for staging, right, you have your own stuff, and then decluttering is actually a big part of staging.
Huge.
And then also the alternative is, especially when it's vacant, like are you going to virtually stage it or in person stage it? What are your thoughts on staging these days? Because I know we've both kind of gone back and forth on
Yeah.
that.
I'm right now in a position where I think it's a huge deal, actually.
Mm.
People always say, well, can't people just see past it? Can't they just see the space? It's like, nope, they can't.
Yeah,
And so,
I know.
and it's like I have walked through many vacant and to be clear, I'm not like I don't have a design mind. And so when I walk through a vacant house that has an open floor plan, which by the way, that's, people want an open floor plan, but I will admit that I have a hard time visualizing sometimes where the furniture will go. And so if
Hmm.
a seller and a listing agent have done that for me and set it up in a minimalistic, open, uh, you know, pretty way, basically, the home is a lot more desirable. And I think the stat is 81% of buyers said that they could see the space better when there is staging in it. I
Yeah,
mean, I think worst case scenario is a home that is completely full of clutter and there's stuff everywhere and there's an odor and that kind of thing. That's the hardest to visualize. Next step would be, obviously staging your own furniture and, in an organized way. Vacant is fine too. And then I think the best case personally is a vacant and staged home. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And then what about like if a house is vacant, you know, what about virtual just staging versus actual staging? Like,
I
what are
mean,
your thoughts on when that kind of works, or either
I
one
think
works? I guess.
officially, physical staging is the best, because you can see it in
Hmm.
photos and in person, where virtual,
Hmm.
obviously, it's not gonna be there in person. At the same time, I really like virtual staging, and so, like, something we've been doing recently that I really like is staging a room that maybe is hard to visualize when it's vacant, so something that has an open floor plan, or maybe it's got an older home that is technically a funky space, but then they stage it in a way that makes it really usable, and then maybe virtually staging a bedroom or something like that. Or, for example, we have a listing right now where there's the primary bedroom and then there's a room off of it, and that room could be another bedroom. It could be a nursery. It could be a gym. It could be an office. And so what we did is we actually staged it with all three that we just mentioned. And so in the listing, right in a row, it's the same picture, but different staging within the photo, just showing the versatility of the room, which I think is really cool. You can't do that with physical staging, obviously.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like in a perfect world, you get the right staging furniture in the right house. Because some furniture is modern, some's mid-century, some's really dated, or some of it's even really like that '90s kind of bigger
Yeah,
stuff that
really
people
big.
have.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like, but in a perfect world, you get the right staging for the right house. And
Mhm.
I think that's in physical stuff is great, but the virtual does give you that versatility, and it's on demand because there are some sellers that or they reach us kind of late in the process, and maybe they've already moved out, or maybe they've had it on the market already,
Mm,
and it didn't work, and then they call us and say, hey, we need to get this on the market quickly, and then that situation, I think it works well to do it virtually. Yeah, but I do agree. In person, it's good to have some furniture in the house because it can feel kind of sterile too sometimes.
yeah.
Okay, I think that's gonna be an ongoing debate forever, the staging thing.
Yeah.
But because then there's the other side that I really do like now is the we always say just declutter your house. Take personal photos down, just like stuff off of counters, whatever. But now we can do, people still live in houses, right? Like most houses that people are selling, they live there.
Yeah.
And so we can virtually remove things too, which can be helpful for a lot of families and a lot of people that just kind of need their things while they're getting ready to sell. So virtually removing items is something that I don't like. We don't see very often, but we do it all the time, and it works like incredibly well. It's
Yeah.
kind of scary that it works as
Yeah.
well as it does.
Yeah, yeah. And to be clear, we can only remove personal items. You can't remove like, I don't know, a
Or out a
ding in the
window, or yeah,
broken
yeah,
window or a ding in the wall or change the wall color or anything like that. But, if you
yeah,
have a bed and you took a photo of it and it's got a bunch of stuffed animals on it or, just
yeah,
something that you don't want in the
yep.
photo, we can remove it. So, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not really our job to tell you to get rid of everything. It is our job to get it on the market as good as it can be. So that's where that virtual comes into play. But okay, cool. Yeah, and then so for the actual content day, that's a big one to me too. That like is kind of overlooked. Sometimes we go into houses for content day, so we're getting the photos, we're getting everything, and you go into a house and it's like you know they're not ready, right? So for us, it's pretty important to be there, especially at the beginning, and then it is also important for the sellers to leave during the shoot. People and things get in the way of the professionals. Like we're not the ones taking the photos, but we want to make sure that the lights are on, the windows are open, things like that, and then like the animals and the people are out of the photos because to me it's still crazy. Like I look at listings, and it's like you know, it's kind of cool if a dog was placed in a photo like on purpose, but when there's like a moving animal or whatever in the
Much.
background, it's like first of all, that dog shouldn't be there. And
Yeah.
if it was like that's the virtual thing, like get rid of the dog at least.
Yeah.
If it's just wandering or birds flying, and
Yeah.
we've had
Or a
these
person
things
in a
happen.
mirror. They're not in the photo. They didn't think they're in the photo,
Yes,
but they are in the mirror. Yeah. That happens a lot.
constantly. It's
Yeah.
constantly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, so basically, like content day, like you've already gotten your deep cleaning. You've removed most of those personal items, and then you leave to go to breakfast or lunch or whatever, and we're making sure, kind of moving things if we need to, just making sure the photographer is set up in a way that we get what we need to get. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, and also just like specific things, occasionally there's things that a photographer will miss. So just to make sure that this is highlighted.
Yep.
For
Yeah.
example, we had something a couple years ago where they had this beautiful built-in bookshelf and the photographer just missed it. So just making I know
Yeah.
that's a silly example, but just making sure that everything's in there or, there's the community is a big sell on the house, right? So making sure that we have
Hmm.
community shots or drone footage of the proximity to the community or that there's a park, 1 block away or it backs up to a park and that's a desirable feature. There's just things that we do have to instruct the photographer to be able to make sure that it's, exposed in the list.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's part of like what sellers, why a lot of times they want to be there for the photos, is to help guide,
Yeah.
the photographer. But I do think that like photographers themselves have an eye for this, right? Like
Yes.
that's why they do what they do. Uh,
Yes.
and then we look at it from a different perspective, like what is important to the next buyer here? Like what do we need to make sure we highlight? Versus a seller might have a different set. Like it was important to them, and that could be good, but it's like, hopefully we can do our job well enough that between the photographer beforehand, like the stager and us, we can make sure that all the contents, it's the deliverables are there. Everything what we need is there.
Right. Well, and speaking of things that are
Yeah.
important, we do have our, we have that document we send to sellers to fill out saying their favorite things about the home, the community,
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of stuff, so that we can either capture it in a photo or write it in the public remarks or somehow make that clear so that, the buyer can see the value there. So that's another
Yeah.
big part of it too that we do before the content day is getting that list from them.
That's super important homework for a seller to do, I think. Yeah. And obviously getting the home ready. But yeah, so the content day itself, like most people understand roughly what that looks like, but photos. We could skip over this and just say professional photos because at this point, it's close to like 80% of homes are professionally photographed, reasonably professionally photographed. But there's a difference even between a good photo and a great photo. Like the biggest thing that stands out to me, other than angles and whatever preferences and
Lighting.
lighting and that kind of stuff. Yeah, but the biggest thing is windows. So most photographers are these days are going to take full light HDR photos. So they're basically taking 3 photos that are exposed differently, and then they digitally stack them on top of each other to get the true lighting of the room without the need for extra lights, right? No flash photography. But then what they miss is when they're doing that, there's no clarity out through the windows. So the difficult part of that is you actually have to take a 4th photo that has the things in the windows that are in focus. And then the photographer goes back and edits that whole package. It's basically 4 or 5 to even 6 photos. And then they have to place the windows. They have to Photoshop each window or each window pane or whatever. If there's a curtain in the way, like it, causes issues, whatever. So it's a process that is incredibly important. And a lot of like, we've had, I mean, we had this question. I don't know if Tori you were around, but one of the agents was asking if how much our photographer was.
Mhm.
We said the number, and they're like, "Well, that's expensive." It's like, yeah, well, it's a lot of work. It's you need to. There's just, I think that's one of the more obviously. I mean, it should be obvious, but it's super important to have the
Yeah.
photos looking like it looks,
Well, yeah,
right?
and as a listing agent, obviously that higher price is worth it to us because our job is to to show your home in the best light and expose it in the best light. And
Yeah,
so, yeah, it's more expensive.
yeah. I just get really offended by photos sometimes.
You get
So
really offended by photos.
I get really offended. I mean, I think it's our first opportunity. It's the first thing they see.
I know.
Everybody has like TikTok brain these days, right? They have 2 seconds of focus.
Yeah.
So we got to make sure it's. But on that same vein, the couple things too, like for me, and this is something that other people maybe disagree with or think about differently, but the 3D tours, like Matterport or different interactive 3D plans that are on third-party websites. But I think those are super important. You know, like we aren't trying to trick someone into coming to your house, right? Like we don't need 100 people to come to your house to get good offers. We need the right people to show up to the house. And that I would say that's even more important when a house is occupied. As they're living in their house. Like we don't need 10 people that had no intention of buying. They're just shopping kind of thing to go look at the house. So I think a lot of times more information is better. There's certainly situations where a 3D tour isn't going to be appropriate. But for the most part, I think it gives you a true feel for what the house is like.
The
The other
flow.
part is yeah, it gives you exactly like we try to give you the flow in the photos, and most people only look at the photos, but the people that do look at the Matterports, they're going to stick on those. They're going to look at it. They're going to spend time in the home,
Mhm.
and we're only going to be getting people that have looked at those are real buyers. Like if they've gone through this process, I think it's like the average person looks at a listing for about 30 seconds online, but if they have a Matterport, it's like 6 minutes. I don't know if it's just because not a lot of them do have them, and so people will get like to just like looking at them. But either way, they're spending time on the listing and giving them more and more opportunities to basically heart it or get rid of it, right? And
Mhm.
because we want the right people there. So Yeah, I don't know if you got any thoughts on that, but
Yeah, no,
I
I
think that's
totally
another
agree.
big one.
Yeah, I really like the
Yeah.
Matterport.
Yeah, and to me, I think it's like photos, Matterport, and then floor plans. So if you can't figure out the flow from those things, maybe you're more, I don't know, 2D visually as opposed to 3D visually. But like floor plans are great. And then also if you're looking at a house that maybe doesn't exactly meet the layout that you're looking for, but then you realize there was like a dining room and a living room that were closed off by a wall. Like 90s houses have that a lot, where you could just open up the wall and then create a big space. So that gives you that like super easy to visualize, and figure out a plan for that. But yeah, floor plans, and I mean the stats show that is
Yeah.
people are looking for floor plans.
Well, yeah, we're showing it in multiple different ways, and also, it helps with people's like kind of like you just mentioned, people's different understanding and learning styles too. So it's just so
Yeah,
transparent. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and that's never like an offensive thing to do. That's all. I don't know if there's really any situations where you don't include the floor plan. I mean, I guess I could think of a couple, but I think they're great. The next ones are going to be like back to the roof at the very beginning, but the drone photos, like drone photos, give you an example of what the area looks like. Like that's huge. If you're behind a park, if you're whatever, a school, something like that, something at least that's good, then we want to highlight that. And then also it shows the quality of the roof. So assuming the roof is in good shape, like we're going to highlight that with a drone. It also gives us different angles. Most of the photos that we take these days, like exterior photos, are from a drone. Just because if you're looking at like a 2 or 3 story house and you're on the ground, it can look weird, But if you can get up level with it, it looks better, most of the time. And then videos, like videos of homes are good. Unfortunately, not a huge thing that people are looking at though. We see it again. We see it online, Instagram, YouTube. Walkthrough videos with like a million views, and then you look at the listing; it's still on the market. So
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, we
but
do it, but yeah, I
yeah,
don't know. I don't know how the viewership is. I don't know how much that
yeah,
impacts, but we do it certainly.
yeah. So I mean, I guess that's the content day. So that normally lasts like 3 to 4 hours or so, and then it takes a few days to get all the content back, and then we get on to the marketing, right? But the next step, so if we were to break this out in like 15 sections here, the next step would be pricing. So if you hire a great real estate agent that knows what they're doing, tons of experience, really good at marketing, great at negotiating, knows your market, everything like that. If the pricing's not right, it's not going to sell. This period, end of story. There's no exceptions to that. You can get lowball offers, but you're going to have to wait a long time until you find, the vultures that are looking for only listings that have been on the market, say over 90 days, no price drops. Like maybe they start sending lowball offers to that, investor offers, things like that. So, you'll eventually get an offer, sure, but it's not going to be a good offer. That's just the end of it. So, I mean, pricing, would you say pricing is the most important thing on this, or like,
I mean, yeah, pricing mixed with marketing in the way that we described, obviously.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
there
of
are
course.
ways that if you have 5 photos and they're taken from an iPhone and the lights are off, that's going to be a problem,
Yeah, yeah,
But in the marketing, in the way that we describe plus pricing is just the most important thing. It's just,
yep,
yeah.
yep,
Yeah,
yeah,
unfortunately, we can't create values. It does need to be justified. And so, yeah, I mean, it just really, at the end of the day, does come down to pricing. And it needs to appraise as well. That's another thing that people don't necessarily think about when they're thinking about what they want for their home. It's like, well, will a bank agree? You know?
yeah, yeah. So price. So let's say you're the seller, Tori, and I meet with you, and we go over, and initially the first conversation that I have with you is going to be, hey, Tori, thanks for reaching out, whatever. What's your plans? Like, where are you going? Those types of things, and then we figure out a timeline. But then I'm going to ask you pretty, loosely, like, and what were you hoping to get for this house? When you sell, like, what are you hoping to list it for? What are you hoping to sell it for? Most of the time, people don't answer that question. Like listing it, what price you want to list it versus what price you want to sell it. If they can answer that, that's a good start. But most people will say like a round number, right? Like, I want $1 million. I want $500,000. It's like, okay, great. Now we have somewhere to kind of understand maybe where you're coming from and hoping that comps are going to justify that. Because our kind of goal for most homes, and let's just call it in the sub $1 million range, is going to be getting it within about $25,000 of what appraised value is. Like that's going to be our goal, is selling it in this range that we tell you it's going to be within about a $25,000 range. And so there's like 3 steps to that. The first step is finding your comparable homes. So within and doing it kind of the way that an appraiser does it. So you're going to try to go out a quarter mile. Let's say it's somewhat in the city. It's not rural. You can go out a quarter mile. You want one active, one pending, one sold in the last 3 months. So most times that is not good enough because you're not really going to find a home that's similar in that amount of time, especially in a situation we're in right now where the transaction volume is a lot lower than it has been in the past. So if we can find that, great. And let's say that number, let's say you want 500 and that number that we can justify is 500. We say, great. We could end the conversation there and we could get you that 500. But what we should be doing then, further is now we're going to increase that to like 12 months. See if we can find legitimate comps. If we still can't, you can go back 24 months. Let's say it requires us to go back 24 months to find legitimate comps. Now we have to do some creativity, right? We have to use some science. We have to use some art to figure out was there appreciation, depreciation, what's happening in that actual market, and then really figure out what each one of those homes that have sold for, like, what was the strategy? Did they list low? Did they list high? Was it in between? What did they do? And so each house is going to be different. And then we have to figure out the houses that sold. We can see what it sold for online. Did they pay buyer's agent commission? Did they pay closing costs? Were there repairs done? Like these are all things that most people aren't going to be doing. Because if you told me you want 500 and I know based on the last 3 months it's definitely worth 500, I could just say, sure, let's do that. But what normally happens is it's actually worth less. But then sometimes it's worth more. So if it's worth more, depending on the market, we need to figure out the strategy to capture all the value. And then the third piece would be like hiring an appraiser. Just saying, you know what, like especially if we're not on the same page, let's just go get an appraisal, true appraisal. Let's see what value they give us.
Mm-hmm.
And then what's going to happen is that's probably going to be very close to what we said initially. And so now you basically have 2 people telling you what they think. But at the end of the day, you're the seller and you get to decide. So I think for our strategy as a whole is really just making sure that we're transparent about pricing, showing you what the real market is saying, and then trying to drive as much traffic as we can through our marketing. But driving traffic depends on pricing. If we're confident on a certain price and it's just not working, like what do? We have to lower the price. Now that's pretty rare. Normally it's a situation of you tell me you want 500,000 and I say, well, it's probably a little high, but 500 these days is a bad number to be using, but it's nice and round.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if what you want to add to that, but it's really a lot. It can be a long conversation, but really at the end of the day, it's just finding good comparables and then seeing what strategy they used.
Yeah.
And then using the best one.
Well, and I think the emphasis on nuance, it's like I hear a lot. Well, my neighbor sold for 550,
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, that's was built 30 years, your construction is 30 years apart. That one has updates. That one has a garage. That one has a different floor plan, that XYZ, and it's like, that's great. That is actually great that a neighbor's house sold for 550, right? When our goal is maybe 500, but we really need to look at the nuance of all the reasons why it sold for that and adjust from there, and to be clear, it's not always lower than, what a seller thinks. It's just really important to be realistic about price, because if you're not, it will unfortunately sit. And, I think a comment we hear a lot is, I don't get it. Why doesn't somebody just put in an offer? And that's a great question that we don't really know the answer to. We don't know why we don't see more people putting in just more offers that are lower, but it does take
Mhm.
some time to get there, basically. And it can just end in a lot of frustration if we're not realistic on price, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I think to that point too, a lot of times people, there's a couple things. If I were a buyer's agent looking at your house that's overpriced, it's like we could write the offer, but it does take us time, and then we have to like try not to offend people and everything else. Or the other part is like, well, it's been on the market for 60 days. They haven't lowered it. They obviously don't want to sell.
Hmm.
So we start thinking about that, or our buyers start thinking about that. And so it's just, yeah, no, I mean, and the other thing too is millennials right now are the largest buying group, and millennials have not had an opportunity to buy homes when they haven't been appreciating. There really isn't a time
Hmm.
where houses haven't been appreciating since millennials have been buying, and we're not really used to getting discounts
Hmm.
that often. Older generations are, and so that's where that comes in. It's like, well, just write an offer. It's like, well,
Yeah, that's a good point.
your
Generation.
generation and demographic would, and it probably is a good opportunity to get decent deals right now. But the largest buying pool, you're kind of removing those people that they
Yeah,
just don't do that
yeah,
for whatever
yeah.
reason.
You definitely want to avoid people speculating why it's sitting on the market. That
Yes,
is a problem, unfortunately. And it's sometimes based in not in reality at all. But when people start speculating, you don't know where their minds go. It's like, well, what's wrong with it? It must be, and there might not be anything wrong with it other than the price is a little high, It's like
I
it's
think that's the most important thing right
yeah.
there. Is whenever you're listing your house, you don't want people speculating at all, at least on the downside. If you want them like, why'd they list it here? They should list it higher. Like that's probably fine.
Yeah.
As long as you get enough people through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as you create some competition if you do that. But yeah, the speculating is the issue for
Yes.
sure.
Yes.
No,
I mean, I
that's
can't
great.
tell you how many buyers I've had to coax into seeing a property that has been on the market for a long time just because they think something's wrong with it. And then we go and it's like, no, nothing's wrong with it. It's just overpriced. So let's offer
Yep.
lower, you know?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that works
Yeah.
because to your point, like the sellers that are listing their house too high are the people that probably would offer low, but
Mhm.
they're not the buyer, they're the seller,
Exactly. Yeah.
and so yeah, no, I think that's super great. I mean, but I think, and then at the end of the day though, because you're the seller, we work for you. We
Yes.
want to work, well, we work with people that want to work with us, and hopefully it's vice versa, right? We're not going to try to make you do anything you don't want to do, but what we are going to do is be really transparent about
Yes.
what we're seeing, and then we kind of want you to tell us, yeah, I think it's worth 500, and then we go, great, that was the number I was going to tell you. That's the perfect world, right? Because we've given you the education and the knowledge, and also more importantly, it's like the stats. You're just looking at it. We have to kind of, unfortunately, the industry is still not very transparent with the things I was talking about. It's like, what kind of closing costs and repairs and all those things. Like, what was the true net sales price? Like, that does require research, but that's part of our job is going to dig that up so that we can give you the real raw numbers. So,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I guess so. The next step, on when we're on the market, or right before we go on the market, it's the marketing content itself has been created, and now we have to decide like what kind of advertisements are we going to run, where are we going to push all this marketing. So in our listing packets that we go over, we kind of separate it into traditional and more modern marketing, right? So your traditional is like your neighborhood outreach, your open houses, our database outreach, other realtors in our network, in our area, traditional print advertising, marketing, that kind of stuff, and then, like perma flyers for sale signs, those types of things. And then there's the more modern stuff, which like recently we've seen. I hate to admit it, but like I think there's some success with partnering with Zillow and Homes.com, just in terms of it somewhat affordable advertising that we can run through them. But like we've been pigeonholed in a situation where we almost have to partner with these third party websites. And then, but basically, that's getting you digitally getting your home out to everybody.
Mhm.
And then over and over and over again, right? Until they actually spend time looking at it. Any thoughts on or anything to add? I can keep going.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's exposure is the most important thing. We need to get it out there so that people see it. And so, yeah, partnering with those groups is what we need to do so that the exposure is higher and that the people are actually retargeted. That's another thing, it could be missed in the first pass, right? So they need to be retargeted.
Yeah. So when someone comes to our personal website, and you sign up on our website, or you don't even have to sign up, but if you look at a home, you're through the Google network and other networks, you're going to be retargeted for the next 30 days.
Mhm.
And that's what all these sites are doing. We're constantly having to pay for ads to be able to do that, but we are driving traffic to our website through some of the traditional piece of marketing, like the flyers and for sale signs. But then again, we're pushing some of the advertising, the PPC stuff, the pay per click promotions, social media promotions. I guess there's some organic reach, but ultimately the organic reach is called in the thousands, right? The paid stuff can be in the hundreds of thousands, which is, that's, we just got to get it out there. So I guess the biggest traditional thing we missed is listing it on the local MLS. So,
Yeah.
when you're listing, that's the way you sell a house at the end of the day, but people can miss it, right? So when we list it on the MLS, it gets syndicated out to all those third-party websites. But there is a lot of listings that have been on the market, and so
Mhm.
specifically with Homes.com, partnering with them, it basically puts our listings, so your house, at the top of their funnel. So if for example, back to a $500,000 example, if your house is 500,000, there's probably a bunch of other houses that are also listed for 500. And so if your budget on your search is 500, you're going to see everything in some random order. Well, you're going to see our house first. And that's how homes.com. Anybody that's a partner with them, their listing is going to be at the top of the list. So there's a lot of people that use those sites. So unfortunately, we kind of have to be on them.
Mhm.
But yeah,
And we're
so
on it regardless because the MLS syndicates to them, but we pay for
it's not
advertising
optimized.
additional. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I mean, you again back like to the pricing conversation. If something's priced right, it's going to end up getting more likes on the third party sites and more interactions. So they're just going to organically, their algorithm's going to start pushing those types of listings a little bit more than other listings. But if you're not priced right, we still need it to be seen. Back to the who's buying, who's willing to offer lower, who's willing to go higher. We just the listing needs to be seen and needs to be not forgot about. So that marketing and advertising is like, I think that's the one thing that sellers, and correct me if I'm wrong, like that's the thing that sellers think that we can change somehow. So at this point in our career, it's like happy to adjust. And we constantly are improving. We're not even, well, there are improvements, but they're kind of incremental. We're adjusting things. We're seeing what other people are doing that we think are doing good, and we're kind of adding to what we have. But there's no real major changes. And so when someone asks like, why is my house not selling? They come back to, well, can we change the order of the photos? Can we do this? Can we do
Or
that?
this sentence in the public remarks says this. Can you swap the words? And it's like, sure. Yeah.
And the problem is like that doesn't make a change, and so it doesn't get it back into the eyeballs of potential buyers. Um, and then a lot of the sites have gotten smart about like they won't even show like price adjustments unless they're larger than $5,000, because traditionally you could just lower the price by $1, and anybody with like a save search, they would get an email from
Yeah.
whatever company. It would
Yeah.
say, hey, your listing you liked has been price reduced. They don't do that anymore. Like, we can host open houses, but unless you have a save on that, that's not going to change anything. That doesn't get more eyeballs on it. It gets the same eyeballs on it again, which is great. But that's what our pay per click and our retargeting and all the other optimization tools are doing, is retargeting anybody that's looked at it. So those little changes are what people get kind of hung up on, and they think like, well, can we do the photos in a something something? It's like, well, we have done that. We have tried that. So yeah, unfortunately, we run into problems when we price things wrong, because when we price things correctly, then our marketing can run, and it does
Yeah.
its job,
Yeah.
and then we get into like the negotiating part, and for another time. But like that, if we can negotiate, that's when our job's fun too.
Yeah, well, for sure. But I think you said something to me a couple months ago that I really liked. It's like, we can yell as loud as we want, but if we're yelling in a room with no one in it, what's that going to do? And I think that's like, and that's just relevant to something that might be really, off on price. It's like we can do as much marketing, we can pay for all these things, but if the price is off, buyers do
Yeah.
know, and banks know.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Exactly.
no,
Yes.
like,
Hurdle one, getting buyers to think the price is right. Hurdle two is getting and that's actually come up more and more. More than we have had in a while.
mhm,
Appraisal issues.
mhm,
Normally they're minor,
mhm.
which, if we're working with a buyer and the price comes in low, that's not ideal. When we're working with a seller and the appraisal price comes in low, like, okay, we did our job. Now we just have to try to negotiate this. These conversations, like, we spend so much time talking about these things all day long. It's
Yes,
like,
yes,
and that's the fun part. I think sometimes, like, some sellers ask genuinely like really good questions, like questions that make you stop and be like, you know what, that was a really good question.
yeah,
And those are fun. I like that, when someone's like, that's a good point. But most of the time it's like, how do we just tell you what you need to know, and then you make the decision, and then we go and work on your behalf and negotiate and do everything like that, because that's when it's more fun. That's why we get the good reviews, is when we finally can get to that point where people are
yep,
like, all right, you guys know what you're doing, do
yep.
it.